Good evening, everyone. My name is Dennis Pinigis, and I want to welcome you to the first annual energy debate here in Carbondale, Illinois. Many of you may be asking yourselves, what is an energy debate? Or you may be wondering why such an accomplished group of speakers have assembled on a Saturday evening to discuss energy issues. Or you may be wondering why we are outside when there are a lot of indoor facilities that could accommodate us. I will quickly answer those questions before the debate begins. Why are we here at the pavilion? The answer is simple: historical perspective. Much of the wood used to build this facility came from the old Carbondale train station that was built in 1854. Why is that important? Because in 1854, it would be another 5 years, 1859, before oil would be discovered in Titusville, Pennsylvania by a man named Edwin Drake. Back then, in 1859, there were only 31 million people living in America, and the average income was only $2,000. Today, thanks in large part to the use of oil throughout society over the last 153 years, our average income today is $46,000, and there are 310 million people living in America. Fossil fuels, which includes oil, coal, and natural gas, account for 86% of the energy that we consume and have been an incredible engine of progress over the last 150 years. However, with progress have come challenges. Industrialization and population growth have had negative impacts on human health and the environment that could not have been predicted back in 1859. And now, in 2012, we stand on the precipice of history. Fossil fuels account for 86% of the energy we use, but we know that fossil fuels will not last forever. And while there's debate over how long they will last, there are warning signs that, at least with oil, we are reaching our peak production capacity. Has anyone been to a gas station lately? We are back to paying almost $4 a gallon for gas, and our economy has been limping along for 4 years with unemployment over 8%. So you see, the backdrop for today's debate is simple. We as a country have seen incredible progress over the last 150 years, thanks in large part to the energy that fossil fuels have provided. But we know that they will not be around forever, and we must plan and discuss, because we live in a democracy where it is up to us to plan for the future. Illinois has a great history of debates, and Illinois has a great history of accomplishments. We hope that by coming here today and discussing what is probably the most important issue of our generation here in Carbondale, that we do our part to ensure that Illinois has a great future. With that said, it is time to explain the rules of the debate and introduce our distinguished group of speakers. And from left to right at the speaker's table is Sylvia Secchi, Assistant Professor for SIU Agribusiness Economics for Biofuels. Brad Richards, Executive Vice President of the Illinois Oil and Gas Association. Phil Gonet, President of the Illinois Coal Association. Kevin Wright, President of the Illinois Competitive Energy Association. And Thomas Wiltowski, Professor at SIU, who is representing the Illinois Solar Energy Association, who could not make it tonight. As far as the rules for the debate, I will ask the questions assisted by Amy McMurrow-Hunter of SIU. Each question will be answered by each speaker, who will have 2 minutes. If there is a follow-up to a question, the speaker will have only 1 minute. When we are done with the moderator questions and those questions that were submitted by the public before the debate, we will take questions from the audience. We ask that you go ahead and write down your question and turn them in to Amy. We have pen and paper for that. Before our speakers begin the debate portion, they have each been given 5 minutes to describe what they see as the future of energy. And we could start from left to right at the table.
All right. Is this working? Yes. Okay. So I actually teach energy economics and policy at SIU. and this is what I tell all my students at the beginning of the spring semester, and Amy will testify that that's the truth because she has been one of my students. There is no silver bullet when it comes to the future of energy. There is a series of things that we can do, and we need to utilize a portfolio approach until we find things that work best. All these solutions have to be tailored to the local resource base. So, for example, I'm here to represent biofuels. In southern Illinois, it makes a lot of sense to think about forest biomass. We have a lot of forest that's not being managed properly. We have done fire suppression. We have not cleaned up those forests. That has actually decreased the value of these forests in terms of like their habitat, their recreational value, the services they provide to us as humans. We can think about second-generation biofuels being produced in southern Illinois. It makes a lot of sense. If you live in central Illinois, you have a lot more wind. You can use more wind. So, I don't think that we're going to be able to say today that there is one thing that's going to solve all of our energy problems. There's several things that we can do. We should do all of them at the same time. And one of the interests that's not at the table tonight, and it never is, by the way, is conservation. We should certainly become more energy efficient. There's a gazillion ways we do that, and that's why there's nobody here at the table, right? Because you would need somebody from the LEED certification program, somebody from the STAR program for appliances, it's construction, it's smart grid, it's very, very many things that we can do, but conservation has to be part of that portfolio, but it's not going to solve all of our problems. So I believe that a rational debate has to include considerations of the fact that not everybody is as vested in environmental issues as some of the members of the audience are, and those people's values and preferences have to be taken into consideration. People still want to drive their cars in the United States. They want to take out their SUVs. They want to go boating on a Sunday. They want to have their big TVs. They want to use electricity. An educated debate should take into consideration all the challenges for each of the energy sectors and the fact that the public will still need a lot of energy for the activities that they want to pursue. Even if we tell them about some of the environmental impacts, this is still going to remain an energy-intensive society.
Again, my name is Brad Richards. I'm with the Illinois Oil and Gas Association. So when I talk about the future of what we see as kind of the future of energy, I certainly don't disagree with what was said about kind of the portfolio approach. But a little more specific to the oil and gas, I will tell you what we've seen in the last decade, and I've worked for IOGA for, it'll be 10 years next week, I think. And what I've seen in the 10 years is just astonishing. It's not necessarily a story that gets told a lot outside of the oil and gas industry, but the combination of horizontal drilling and high-volume hydraulic fracturing in less permeable rocks, which include organic-rich shales. So you hear about the Marcellus Shale, the Bakken, the Barnett, which really kicked all of this off. But now it's being applied, those same technologies, in reservoirs that didn't quite have the attributes that we looked for conventional oil and gas wells. The combination of these technologies, neither of which is new. We've been drilling horizontal wells and doing hydraulic fracturing for decades. But the combination and larger and advances in the technologies has really transformed the oil and gas industry. We had 10 years ago when I started at IOGA, we were in low teens for natural gas prices, certainly above 10. Today we have $2.50 MCF natural gas. That's not by chance. It happened because of the shale gas revolution spurred by technology. Now we're seeing, just in the last couple of years, really it's just emerging as we speak, is the same technology starting to produce tremendous amounts of oil here in the U.S. I think the number is about a 25% increase since like 2008. And certainly a significant increase just in the last couple of years. We have things like the Bakken Shale in North Dakota and now the Eagle Ford in South Texas, which is an oil productive shale. And I'll just leave you with this: and some of you folks have met me. Now there is interest from the same folks who brought us these large shale plays. There's interest in Southern Illinois in the New Albany Shale, and I would estimate probably 500,000 acres have been leased. That may be a bit of an exaggeration, but certainly 400,000 in that ballpark. There are companies spending a lot of money in Southern Illinois because they think there could be an oil and gas play in those same tight rocks here in our basin, and it could be a huge economic development for Southern Illinois. So I'll just kind of leave it at that. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Phil Gonet. I'm the president of the Illinois Coal Association, as Dennis has said earlier. I guess if I want to leave you with one fact tonight, the fact is that Illinois has an abundance of coal. Our coal reserves, the energy content of our coal reserves are greater than the energy content in the oil in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait combined. Think of that for a second. That's a huge energy resource. According to the Illinois State Geological Survey, Illinois has about 211 billion tons of coal beneath its border, or I should say ahead, about 211 billion tons. In the last 200 years, we've mined about 8 billion tons of that. They believe that, the survey believes that about half of that is recoverable coal. So in round figures, we have about 100 billion tons of recoverable coal here in Illinois. To put that into perspective, the country used 1 billion tons of coal last year. So think of this: the state of Illinois could meet the country's energy needs from coal, the present coal production, for the next 100 years. That's a huge, huge resource. One of the problems with Illinois coal, obviously, that some people here know, is that it's high in sulfur content. And the air emission standards that have been promulgated by the federal government over the past few years, or I guess of the past 3 decades, have been a problem for Illinois coal. There is technology that will help take the sulfur dioxide out of the flue gas, but that leads me to my second point, and that is the United States has the most restrictive air emissions requirements in the world. No other country in the world has the air emission standards that the United States has. And the proposed regulations, however, could put coal and coal-burning power plants out of business. So that's one of the concerns that I have for the future. The promising point for the future is there is technology there, and people laugh at this. They say there's no such thing as clean coal or clean coal technology, but there's a technology that really isn't new. It's been in place for over 100 years. It's called coal gasification. We gasify coal, and the technology has improved quite a bit over the last 100 years. In fact, there's one company in South Africa by the name of Sasol that produces oil from gasifying coal. South Africa could not import oil because of their apartheid policies of years and years ago, but they'd have an abundance of coal. So they were able to use the gasification technology that really came into existence in the early 1900s to use their coal in order to make oil. That's a gasification process that could be used as a clean coal technology. One of the biggest disappointments that the coal industry, in my opinion, has experienced in the last almost 10 years now is the FutureGen project. FutureGen was supposed to be a federal public partnership, private partnership, to build a zero emissions power plant. The state of Illinois put in a bid for this, and we were awarded the project to build a standalone 250 megawatt power plant in Mattoon that would be zero emissions, capturing CO2 and storing it. The project was canceled by the Bush administration. It was restored by the Obama administration, but then the project was shifted to to a power plant in Meridosha that it's a different technology, not a newer technology, but a different technology that would retrofit old coal-burning power plants. And to me, I'm not sure that that's the right thing to do, to take a power plant that's 60 or 70 years old and try to retrofit it to capture and store CO2. So the points I'd like to leave you with is we have a great abundance of coal in Illinois. It is a vital part of the nation's economy. This economy in this country has run for many years on the low-cost energy, mostly driven by coal. And at one time, over 50% of this nation's energy did come from coal. As Brad alluded to, the price of natural gas recently has hurt that. And so the amount of energy produced off of coal recently has gone down. Most experts don't think that the price of natural gas will stay low for that long a time, and the swing will come back to coal. We need base load power. One of the issues that we'll probably talk about tonight is base load power, and that means that's power that can be generated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I'm all for wind power and I'm all for solar power, but as most of you know, that doesn't happen 24/7. So you need a base load power out there that's going to support alternative energy sources, and with our abundance of coal, I don't think coal should go away. Thanks.
I'm Kevin Wright, and I'm president of the Illinois Competitive Energy Association, and I represent competitive suppliers who sell, resell, market electric or natural gas supply to business, governmental, nonprofit customers, and residential customers. And what that means is we are an alternative to the utility for energy supply, and we compete against the utility and against each other to offer the customer, the end-use customer, the lowest price or the best price available for that electricity or natural gas. So I come from the perspective of although I'm not an economist, I do come from the perspective of very much a market, pro-competition viewpoint, not only in my current position, but also as a former utility regulator. I think when I look at the future, and I'm only going to speak for myself, that caveat, so that I can at least explain to my board of directors that I wasn't speaking for them, but speaking for myself, and I went off on a tangent. I think what I see at least in the near future, because I think it's hard to predict with any real accuracy what the energy outlook or policy is going to be, is that I really believe that in terms of baseload generation, the 24/7 that Phil referred to, is largely being driven by the market, by price, and by economics, and by the environment. And the winner right now, in everyone's estimation, at least in the short term, is natural gas. I would say in the near future, in terms of baseload generation, it's going to be natural gas and nuclear. Already, the utilities and plants are responding to the market price. They are beginning to switch over to natural gas or build natural gas-fired plants. And so the price signal is natural gas appears to be the fuel of choice now and in the foreseeable future. Nuclear is still very, Illinois has the largest fleet in the country. It is still low cost compared to other fuel sources, and I expect it may not grow in terms of the number of plants, but I do believe it's going to continue to be a part of our baseload generation. I say this with some reluctance because Phil's a friend of mine, and I have supported the coal, and I still do support the coal industry, but I believe it's facing a very difficult challenge in the future. in that economics and environment are two strikes against that industry. And until and unless there is a major breakthrough on clean coal technology that is economic, I think it's going to be very hard for at least Illinois coal to play a very prominent role in baseload generation. The renewables, as Phil indicated, are not baseload. Those are intermittent. They're nice to have in the portfolio, but they cannot be counted on as your baseload generation when you need it at the time you need it. For instance, an article came out, I can't recall the publication, but from an economist talking about solar. And its impact to the Chicago area during this brutal summer that we had. And wind, particularly wind. Wind's contribution was about zero, because we had very little wind blowing during the summer. So its contribution to the load was really insignificant. Both wind and solar are not free. They are generally above market price, and that cost is passed on to the ratepayer for the utility and the competitive supply customer that I serve. So I think in the long run, I would say the future looks fairly promising for natural gas. It has, while there may not be an expansion of nuclear plants, that fleet will continue to contribute. I think it's always going to be a challenge for coal, given the economics and the environment. And the renewables do not, in my estimation, while there is a place in our overall balanced portfolio, I don't think that one can rely on the renewables to take up a measurable part of future energy demand. And they cost. They're above market. They need to be subsidized in order to compete in the marketplace. One thing that the professor said, which I think is another issue that has been and is playing even a larger prominent role than the development of baseload generation right now, and that is energy efficiency and conservation measures. And those programs that curtail demand or reduce demand during peak time periods when energy, particularly electricity, is needed the most. Several studies, particularly in the Midwest, Mid-Atlantic region, have attributed the energy efficiency, conservation, and demand response programs as essential to handling energy demand, and those programs will continue to be prominent from now and into the future. Thank you.
My name is Thomas Wiltowski. I'm from SIU, and practically it's pretty nice to be the last one, because what I was planning to say was already told by my colleagues here. So I have a pretty good job, but in addition to what was already told, I would like to say a few words about the energy mix. We cannot say that we can count only on coal or wind or solar. We have to use whatever we have. And I believe that's the most important. And another pretty important stuff is efficiency and conservation. When I'm driving in the evening, I see a lot of houses which are lighted everywhere, which is a problem. And then we are, of course, complaining when the utility bill is coming home to our house, to our mailbox, complaining for a few minutes and doing this all over the way, again. So we have to have kind of the lesson how to conserve energy. Another is efficiency. When I have the TV, for instance, which takes 300 watts, and I can purchase the new one, which takes only 100 watts, that's a huge difference. And the difference which you will see not only on our bill, utility bill, but the difference which you will see only when we are talking actually how to get the energy. Another story which I would like to, I'm the teacher at the university, and sometimes students are asking how we can produce energy. That's important. We are not producing energy. We cannot produce energy. This is what thermodynamics teaches us. We can only transfer one form of energy to another one. which usually we are doing this to electricity, like chemical energy, which is within the coal, of gasoline. Chemical energy which are transferring to heat and then to mechanical, so you'll be able to drive or fly if you wish. But just to say something what my colleagues didn't mention is energy policy. There is no country around the world which has a real energy policy. Usually when you are coming close to the election, everyone is talking about policy, energy policy, but practically they don't know what they're talking about. And I would like to say what Mark Twain wrote long time ago, that talking about the energy is like weather forecast. Everyone can say about this. When I will tell you that I have the best weather forecast for tonight, it will be dark. I will be always right? I don't know if this will make you happy and give you some additional information, but who knows. So it's pretty nice to have you here, and I believe that we learn something, both sides, and we have to do something. But energy mix, which I'm usually putting when I'm teaching this semester alternative energy and fuels, I'm learning from my students as well. One of my students last week told, you know what, when I'm going into this energy business, I'm learning that we are being pushed to go back to the caves. There's one important problem. We do not have enough caves. So what it means, we have to do something. And I hope we will find something tonight as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those very informative introductory remarks. We'll be rotating who the first speaker is, and so we'll be going right down the line. So, Brad, you'll be going first on this one. And here's the question. It's please discuss the strengths as well as the challenges of the organization or energy sector that you represent.
Well, the strengths I've talked about a little bit with the introductory remarks. I mean, we produce energy that we produce a product a lot of people want, and we're doing a pretty good job of it. We're making more oil and gas in this country than we've made in a very long time. So that's pretty obviously the strengths. The challenges for us, we have to educate people about there are environmental issues that, and I know a lot of folks here are interested in hydraulic fracturing. There's a lot of misinformation out there. There are challenges with any large-scale development. These resource developments can be very large, and there are challenges. The proper handling of produced water and flow back on the frac fluids, all of that stuff is absolutely valid. The proper well construction to ensure that groundwater is protected from any oil and gas production, regardless of high volume hydraulic fracturing. All of those things are real. What we have to do is, and we're working on one of the challenges right now. The Illinois Oil and Gas Association is negotiating, I guess you can say, a comprehensive regulatory scheme for the potential large-scale development. And it is just potential. I have to add here that we don't know that the resource play here in Illinois that is currently being leased, whether it'll work or not. But those are the challenges for us, to educate folks about the problems that are real and those that aren't real, and then work for legislative solutions and beyond.
Well, I hope everyone understands what the greatest strength is for coal, and it's the abundance. And not only just in Illinois, but in the country. The United States has the largest deposit of coal reserves in the world. Illinois has the largest deposit of bituminous coal reserves in the country. About 25% of the country's bituminous coal reserves are here in Illinois. So we have it here, and what do we need? We need the technology to use it. As I mentioned earlier, I'm very disappointed in the lack of progress on the Future Gen project. I thought that project was an excellent example of a public-private partnership to advance a technology that would help produce low-cost energy and do it in an environmentally responsible way. Other coal gasification projects around the country have been tried. There's only one that I know of that's really under construction across the border in Indiana. We've had several projects in Illinois that have come up on the drawing board, but my good friend Kevin here and his buddies have opposed them because, as you heard from him, he's for market-driven energy costs and rates, and I'm generally a market-driven person myself. However, when it comes to a technology that, although I said earlier it's not relatively new, it hasn't been tested in the United States, and everyone wants to invest in the third, fourth, or fifth plant. There's a lot of reluctance to invest in the first one, which I think it was critical for the government then to step in and to subsidize that and to use FutureGen as a template for other coal-burning power plants or gasification plants to take form after that. It's going to take a while. We need to learn from the technology. Think of all of the technological advances that have taken place in our lifetimes, and some of you out there are pretty young, but even in your lifetimes, look at, this phone here is a computer. This didn't exist 30 years ago. Just think of the technological advances that could take place in coal gasification that would drive down the costs, that wouldn't require the subsidies that my friends oppose in order to get the plants built in the first place. We need steel in the ground. We need projects up and running so that the engineers and the scientists can learn from that and use a source of energy that we have in great abundance, and that's coal.
Well, I think the greatest challenge is, and Professor said it right, there is no energy policy in this country, and there's no comprehensive energy policy in this state as far as I know of. And that policy, whatever it is, tends to bounce from whatever the flavor of the month is or the year is, driven by politics in our capital, here in the state, or in Washington. At one point it's wind, then it becomes solar, and then it's something else. My belief is the market is the guide. It should, if this technology or fuel source needs to be part of the portfolio, it should be financed by investors and shareholders, not on the backs of ratepayers and competitive supply customers. With that said, I think the biggest challenge that I see is, at least for my industry, whose chief objective is to deliver to the customer, whether it's residential or commercial industrial customer, the lowest price, best priced fuel source in the market, because fuel costs for commercial industrial customers runs 20 to 40% of their operating expense. It's a matter of whether they remain competitive in the marketplace. It is a matter of whether they continue to employ and stay viable. For residential customers, those particularly in municipal aggregations, where communities have banded together to put their load together and put it up for solicitation, it's a matter of a cost savings for local communities. So our goal is to deliver power, to supply power. It can be a combination by choice. We can customize it to the customer's wish, but we're always seeking the lowest price available. What is challenging is energy policies that try to pick winners and losers and pass the costs on to the customer. That is the biggest challenge that I see, at least in the short term, from my vantage point.
I would like to add a few words about the gasification. This is what Phil Gatton mentioned. There's a beautiful process, and actually when you travel worldwide, you will see more and more gasification plants being built. Recently, actually less than a year ago in Netherlands, Shell opened a new gasification power plant, which, believe or not, the workers are with white shirts. So it's not so dirty. But you can gasify not only coal, you can gasify biomass, you can gasify the waste material. And actually my colleagues from Czech Republic, they got all this bad stuff from the sewage treatment plant and they gasify it as well. So this something is happening that we can actually recycle something and produce energy all over again. Of course, is important factor in gasification is efficiency. When you have typical coal-fired power plant efficiency, when we are in the neighborhood of 40%, we're supposed to be pretty lucky. It's always around 30-35%. For gasification, we can double efficiency. What it means that we can use less fuel to produce the same amount of energy. And I believe that's the way we're supposed to go.
So obviously with corn at $8, the short-term challenge for the ethanol industry is quite obvious, right? But the long-term challenge is that there is subsidy fatigue, and I see a theme emerging here in terms of lack of a well thought out, well laid out long-term energy policy. When George Bush was president, this country decided to invest substantially in second-generation biofuels, and they have not they have not become commercially viable on a large scale. They have the potential to be more environmentally friendly if properly regulated, and that's something else, by the way, that maybe we'll come back to about the markets. Don't forget that there is pollution. Pollution is a cost to consumers, and it needs to be regulated. So the markets are fine if pollution is priced as well, okay? So second-generation biofuels have the potential to produce less pollution. If we harvest some trees out of the Shawnee National Forest, believe me, we're not going to be creating any environmental problems. We're actually going to be solving some environmental problems because we're going to stop encroachment of the oak hickory system by the maples, for example. So the challenge is to be part of a long-term policy that does not change every time we change government, even more every time we elect somebody from a different part of the country that has different regional interests at heart. We were doing biofuels under Jimmy Carter because of the energy crisis. We stopped doing them for 30 years. We lost all that time. The other thing that I really think the future gen problem exemplifies is that research doesn't get done in a day. You can't just turn that switch on and off and get product immediately. We need to have a long-term strategy. Otherwise, this is really the biggest challenge to move towards advanced energy solutions, in my opinion.
Thank you. I'd like to remind everybody, if you have any questions, to go ahead and write them down and pass them up to Amy. I think we're getting several questions already, so we're going to try to get to all the questions. The next question for the group, and it starts with Phil, is all of the energy sectors represented impact the environment. How do you envision that impact being minimized?
I think I've answered that one. Coal gasification or zero emissions, I don't think you could get much more minimal impact on the environment. However, there are some who would challenge that, and there are probably some here tonight. If you capture and store CO2 and store that underground, I know the question is, can that be done safely? Well, this gentleman to my right represents the oil and gas industry, and he'll tell you that oil and gas stays underground, and it stays underground in Illinois exceptionally well because of our geology. We have a unique geology in Illinois that's much different than other parts of the country, where we have reservoirs of oil and gas that have several capstones or layers of stone where gas or oil cannot permeate unless it's drilled up, or in the CO2 case, drilled down. And I believe, for one, that CO2 can be stored safely underground forever. There are experiments that are going on right now. The Illinois State Geological Survey is doing one with ADM over in Macon County, and that project is moving along rather well. But we need to continue the research, and I agree with you. It doesn't happen overnight, Sylvia. It certainly doesn't. It does take time, but it would be nice to have a policy that kind of put the cart before the horse and start the research process so that we would be further along with the results than knew what to do with them when we got them. I agree with it.
Well, I don't represent any one particular fuel choice. We sell them all, and it's dependent upon what the customer wants. So I don't have a lot of expertise. All I could say is at least as a representative of the competitive supplier industry, we do promote renewables. The state of Illinois is under a progressive renewable portfolio plan where renewables are to constitute 25% of our overall makeup by 2025. The suppliers are under that same requirement, so we're doing our part for the environment by meeting our renewable portfolio standard requirement. And certainly customers that wish, even if it's above market and they're paying a premium, actively promoting renewables as part of their supply that they're getting. We have a number of customers that want to be green, either 100% or some portion of what they're buying. We can do that. So while we don't represent a particular fuel source, we do have a statutory responsibility and a customer responsibility to promote renewables and environmentally friendly fuel sources. So we try to do our part in that manner.
Speaking about the environmental impact, let me recall you from kindergarten, second law of thermodynamics. It says that we have always to produce waste heat, waste material, whatever it is. When I'm hearing that someone is saying zero emission, no, there's no way. We can use another term which is most close to reality is near zero emission. But we can be also smart with it. I will give you the example. I believe Phil mentioned about the sulfur in the coal.
I think we're going to hit a train going to be coming here in a second, but continue until I can't hear you.
Okay, I will be louder than the train. At least I will try. Especially as the topic is pretty hot. So, hello guys. But anyway, from the coal-fired power plant, SO2 is being produced. I believe it's okay now. So this engine car was an example of the second law of thermodynamics when you saw the exhaust fume actually, which according to the World Health Organization is very, very cancerogenic. There's the exhaust from the diesel engine. But speaking about the coal, for instance, sulfur, so for coal combustion, SO2 is being formed, which you have the technology how to capture it. But on the other hand, when you are doing gasification, you are producing different component of sulfur, which we can get elemental sulfur, which you are using every day. Part of our tires, each tire contains about 5 to 8% of sulfur, for instance. So we can actually change this waste, or other words, environmental unfriendly component of something what we can use. This is a great impact. Now, speaking about the, for instance, wave, solar, tidal energy, we have the problem. When we're putting the windmill, there is a lot of research done that it may actually interact not friendly way with the birds. So we have to teach birds how to fly around. I read some article about the wave energy. There is special design, so someone was complaining that we can kill the fishes. Fishes are smart. They know how to bypass. It takes time. As we as a childhood, this is hot, we cannot touch it. But before we learn it, we touch it a few times at the bad lesson. So it's the same story. Now, speaking about the environment, of course no one would like to live in the bad environment. And technology is moving forward in any area, and including this one, that we can actually minimize the effect of energy transformation, not production, to the way that we can live pretty nice way.
So I hope those that are older in the audience remember that the main one of the reason why this wave of ethanol production started is to help large metropolitan areas in the United States reduce local air quality problems. So ethanol was used as an oxygenate to help cars burn cleaner, because there were a lot of air quality problems in places like Denver or LA. And when we started with MTBA, which turns out is a carcinogenic substance. And so we moved to ethanol. It is clear that we are going to have an environmental impact. It is also clear that we can be smart and use policies that minimize that impact, that price that cost, that encourage conservation and encourage energy efficiency. What we have to be honest about is the fact that there is even wind energy, it can create problems, local problems, and may not be welcome. In fact, that's been happening throughout the country. Everybody is in favor of it as long as it's not produced in their backyards. So there are environmental impacts. As part of an energy policy, we should price them, and so people can make a decision on the full cost of those energy choices.
I'll just, for oil and gas, just touch on three things that kind of popped into my head, not necessarily an all-inclusive list, but first of all, with the increase in natural gas consumption here in the U.S., we've seen, I believe the number that's been quoted most recently is the CO2 emissions levels for this country are the lowest since 1992. That's not by accident. That's one of the things that affordable, in fact, cheap natural gas has brought as far as an environmental impact, a positive impact. A couple other things that I think get kind of lost in the discussion with the new style of oil and gas development with horizontal drilling is you can actually drill multiple wells from a single pad. We are significantly reducing the surface impacts, and I think that it's a big deal. They can drill up to 8 wells from a single location. And drill out horizontally in all directions. In fact, they refer to it as eco-pad drilling, and it contributes in its own way to minimizing the impacts. And then the other things Phil touched upon, CO2 sequestration. The oil and gas industry will be at the forefront of that. The technical expertise will largely come from the oil and gas industry for CO2 sequestration. And that's what we're seeing right now. And I would encourage you to look at what the Illinois State Geological Survey is doing with CO2 sequestration, because it's quite an endeavor, and I think it does hold a lot of promise. I'm like Phil, I was a little disappointed with the way Future Gen went down. But anyway, those are three things just to kind of point out that it's not always bad. I mean, every source of energy is going to have an environmental impact, but with oil and gas, it's not all negative.
This hour programming on WDBX Carbondale is sponsored in part.
Okay, the next question is: rising energy costs impact everyone's budget. What are the steps your organization is taking or can take to keep prices as low as possible for consumers?
Well, the number one effort that we as competitive suppliers of energy can do is provide the lowest priced or cost energy to our customers that reflects the market. And that's the number one thing we do, is provide a competitively priced supply product to our customers that's cheaper that they can get from the utility or any other supplier. The second thing we do is, depending on the customer, whether it's residential or commercial, industrial, is that we can take a look at your usage and suggest ways of how you can reduce that to lower your overall energy cost. We're also promoters of energy efficiency programs and demand response curtailment programs. And energy efficiency could be anything from dealing with air conditioning to refrigerators and the amount of energy those use and when it's used, to demand response programs where you actually, at certain times of the day when demand is at its highest in terms of the whole area or region, that you curtail your use. In the long run, that helps in terms of price, that terms in reliability. So those are the efforts that the competitive suppliers can do on behalf of their customers.
In terms of the rising energy, of course, we have to watch twice before and think twice before we turn any energy using device at our home. But on the other part, I would like to ask how those prices are being created. When I see that there is a homecoming weekend here at SIU, immediately all the gas stations are raising the price of the gas, saying that either way everyone will buy the gas. Doesn't make any sense for me, but that's the life which you have to criticize loudly. There's no reason to do it. Another part is why the gas price at Cape Girardeau, for instance, which is 47 miles from Carbondale, is always cheaper than here. It's coming from the same oil. Next stuff which we would like to discuss actually, and this has to be solved this way or another, is how we can save and conserve energy at our home. We all know that we have to change the bulbs for those fluorescent because they are taking less energy. But probably not all of you know when you are using this bulb for a minute or two, then it takes more energy than regular bulb because it's some kind of the warming up time. So this is missing usually in the information generally available, then you have to learn about this. So there's a lot of issues which you have to explore by ourselves. We have, when you are not watching TV, why TV is always on. So conservation is one point. Efficiency, and everyone was saying here, is another very important point. And then, of course, the regulation. This is exactly what I heard for the last 10 years. And my understanding is, which I know by definition that I'm wrong, except Professor Anderson, he will say different story about me. But what we have to know that what the regulation is saying, when I will learn, for instance, that power plant in California is producing much cheaper electricity than here, I can make the phone call or internet and just purchase it from the cheapest power plant. This is in theory. We are far away from this actual situation. A lot of stuff has to be solved, searched, and introduced. This is impossible. Talk to any operator of the power plant. For instance, when I will own power plant and produce most expensive electricity, and no one will buy for it, I'm down, because actually I cannot stop the generator. I can do it, but coming back into the peak, it will take 2 days to start to run at the full RPM. So there's a lot of problems actually, big problems, small problems, but we have to actually solve it all together. And we have to ask our reps actually to help to do it and to discuss it. Einstein said that impossible takes longer, but it's not impossible. And we have to always keep in mind actually, because we have to have our voice, how those prices are being created.
So I'm going to say something quite radical here. We don't want to keep those prices low because low prices encourage overuse. You want high prices that reflect the full cost of producing energy. Let's not kid ourselves. Low gas prices have produced a fleet in this country that's pathetic in terms of oil use compared to Europeans that have much higher oil prices and gasoline prices. The fact of the matter is, people respond to incentives. The incentives we've had in this country in the last 30 years have sent very mixed signals towards conservation, energy efficiency, buying cars that consume less gasoline. The fact of the matter is, if we want to take care of the environmental impacts of energy production, that will mean that consumers have to pay higher prices. There's no two ways about it. You can't have the cake and eat it. And we've been trying to do this for 30 years. We need to educate consumers about, for example, issues like peak load. You have maybe to think about turning off the AC when everybody else has their AC on, because producing that electricity is really expensive. We have to teach people that you don't need a pickup. I mean, like when I came here to the United States, everybody has a pickup. What, is everybody a lumberjack? I don't think so. And the only way to do that is with higher prices. You can see why I'm not running for office after saying these things.
Well, for the oil and gas industry, I think fossil fuels in general, I think we could probably include coal in this. What we're doing in response to rising prices is trying to produce more and more of it, which kind of screws up the higher prices. It's how supply and demand works, and we're constantly working to produce more when the prices are higher, and it has the effect of lowering prices. And I can point to something very simple. I alluded to this in my opening remarks. We've gone from, I think, actually as high as 14 on peak days but certainly $12 type pricing for MCF natural gas to $2.50. That's because we went out and drilled a whole bunch of wells and used technology to produce a lot of natural gas. So the guys that are after this with a profit motive kind of tend to screw up a good thing.
I don't think I have too much to add. As an organization, we just represent the industry. It's up to each of our individual members to do their part to be the low-cost energy producer. But I would like to give a tip of the hat to the state of Illinois, both SIU with the Coal Research Center and the Office of Coal Development with the Illinois Clean Coal Institute. Both of these organizations do a lot of research in coal use and also coal production, and trying to find ways to make it more productive to mine coal. Where can we shave costs or reduce costs and be more productive in producing coal? And obviously it's the low-cost producer, as Kevin has mentioned, is what wins the day. Right now, coal is quite frankly losing that battle to natural gas because of as we're hearing here tonight, the huge amount of natural gas that's being pumped into the marketplace right now. I, for one, don't think it's going to last forever, and there will be an equilibrium of price, and I don't think anyone knows where that's going to be just yet. But coal is going to be there, and our producers strive to be the low-cost energy provider or the low-cost provider, because if they don't, they go out of business. And that's what happened to Illinois Coal in 1990 when the acid rain law passed, and high sulfur coal in Illinois, our coal prices, spot prices may have been between $45 and $50 a ton. Back in 1990, they fell to $20 a ton. And a lot of companies, a lot of coal mines around this area couldn't make money at $20 a ton, and they went out of business. So if you want to stay in business, you have to be the low-cost energy provider, and the one who benefits from that is the consumer. They ultimately are one of the beneficiaries. But to follow up what Sylvia says too is that price is a strong behavior modification tool. And for too long in this country, we've had too low of gasoline prices so that we don't take steps to conserve. And if we allowed prices to be unconstrained, we could have more of an impact on energy use there as well. But we could talk about that for 2 more hours, so I'll pass up on that. Okay.
The next question will be Dr. Wiltowski, is how important is energy efficiency and conservation of natural resources?
For utility bills, both natural gas and electricity, and we are trying to conserve it to lower the bill. But how to do it? Simple. We have to watch what people are doing and actually very often when I'm over there after hours, turning off the lights, which people forgot to turn it off. But recently I got the idea actually, and we are trying to move as an example at SIU. I got the idea to make so-called green classroom. Think about this. When classes starts at 8 o'clock in the morning and the last lecture is at 5, in most of the classes no one is turning off the light. Who's turning the light? Janitors at 11 p.m. when they clean the classrooms. So the idea is, for instance, to replace the regular bulbs or fluorescent with LED bulbs, which are actually connected to the sensor, motion sensors. Pretty cheap. We can get actually LED bulbs relatively inexpensive, assuming that we are not buying at Lowe's or local stores. We can buy it somewhere else 3 times cheaper. Sensors, and actually two of my students have started to make this calculation how much energy we can save. Another point in this classroom, which I will use as an example, because this will be probably reality within 2 or 3 months, is when the sun is coming to the window, we have the automatic shades. Will be just turned on, actually they'll cover the window automatically. Then it will lower the cost of cooling, which is the same story. The same is only summertime. In wintertime, of course, the effect will be opposite, but this can be programmable. So this is important for organizations. This efficiency is important to our house, because efficiency translates into the money. Efficiency translates into what you are paying every month.
So, I actually teach this stuff, so I could keep you here for half an hour about this.
You have 2 minutes.
Darn it. But I think one of the example that I want to use is, in this country there's been controversy about the use of corn for ethanol production, because corn is a energy intensive crop. It uses a lot of energy in the form of fertilizer and diesel machinery. But the industry has made a lot of progress in the last 10 years in using the byproducts of ethanol production, the dry distiller grains or DDGs, that can be fed to animals. And right now there is some really interesting things going on whereby they have the cattle, they capture the methane from the cattle, they use the methane from the cattle to in the plant, they produce the ethanol, and then they feed the byproducts to the cattle. So I think that especially in this country, the industry is very, very aware of energy balance issues and energy yield issues. So they're looking at how much energy they're inputting in the crop and in the production of ethanol, and how much energy they're getting out of it. And they've made tremendous progress. I would say that this progress still does not mean that corn-based ethanol is more efficient than sugarcane-based ethanol. And so that's why there's a lot of people that want to up our imports of sugarcane ethanol from Brazil, because it's produced in a more energy efficient way. But the industry is certainly very, very aware of these issues and has been working towards solving them.
Well, as producers of oil and gas, I don't know that necessarily efficiencies are what we're primarily concerned with, other than efficiently producing it. And in terms of a conservation perspective, one of the things that we try to do is get all the technically recoverable oil and gas that we can out of the ground, not leave it there where it isn't utilized. And to that point, in Illinois, we have some really interesting stuff going on, including like CO2 to use for enhanced oil recovery. So we kind of have you get the environmental benefit of sequestering the CO2 in an oil reservoir and getting more of the oil and gas out. But otherwise, probably not a question that I'm the guy you want to listen to.
Neither am I. We're not into conserving natural resources. If you include coal in that, we're in the business of mining that natural resource and using that. But I don't want to be, totally silly on this. But because again, looking at this as it impacts are individual producers. It's to their best interest to be efficient, to use all of their resources wisely and efficiently in order to be the low-cost producer. And so that's first and foremost of what they do. They have to do that every day to be in operation to continue to exist.
From the competitive supplier community, it's largely the promotion of energy efficiency measures and products, whether the customer is incentivized or not. But the bottom line usually is the customer benefits because of cost savings. So it's not while we're not primarily responsible, it is a service to our customer to promote those kinds of measures and have them take advantage of it. What I can say in the global perspective, Illinois is in 2 grid systems that actually manage the flow of electricity throughout Illinois, the Midwest, and the Mid-Atlantic. Energy efficiency measures have and continue to be a major contributor to reducing demand, particularly during peak period times. Some of that is incentivized, and some of it through actual payments to large user customers to ratchet down their energy use at particular periods of time, or through certain energy efficiency programs. Others do it because it saves them money on the utility bill. So I can say in terms of energy efficiency, less so natural resource conservation, but energy efficiency and conservation measures, those are playing an increasingly important role in our overall energy use.
Okay, thank you. Because we've gotten so many questions from the audience, I think what we're going to do is switch over to the questions that were submitted either by email or Facebook, and then the questions that were submitted tonight. So the first question that we got through email prior to the debate, and it looks like a question that could be answered best by Sylvia or Brad or both. Here's the question. It has been argued that the price of minerals, oil, gas, etc., has nothing to do with supply and demand cycles. According to many sources, including the flyers in the seat pockets of Delta Airlines, that the price is set by hedge funds, speculators, derivatives, in the stock market. Do you agree or disagree? And should financial hedging in the markets be limited to just those companies that actually utilize the resource? And that was submitted by email by a gentleman in Murfreesboro.
You're the economist.
First of all, Delta Airlines also says that their sandwiches are delicious. A very large pinch of salt is required, and so I would argue that, especially in the case of oil, fundamentals have always had little to do with price. Even when the United States produced pretty much all its oil, the Texas Railroad Commission determined prices. Oil is a natural monopoly. After the Seven Sisters were kicked out, essentially, of the business of setting up their own monopoly for oil worldwide, while the U.S. had its internal one, we had another cartel, which was OPEC. That's not fundamentals, that's monopoly power, okay? It's not demand and supply that's driving this. And it so happens that the countries in OPEC have lots of geopolitical issues to take care of. If you look at the price of oil, a lot of it is driven by politics and not demand and supply. So I think that, the third thing to say is that, you can get 5 or 6 PhD dissertations written on this topic in the last 10 years. Everybody has an opinion about this. But certainly it's not just speculators. And certainly demand and supply at the world level, when you're looking at things like oil, are just a component of a very complex market system. When it comes to gas, we don't have, and then even when it comes to oil, there isn't one market for oil, and there isn't one market for gas. These are regional markets. There's very high transportation costs. There's issues related to storage and storage capacity. So these are very complicated markets where a variety of factors interact. I think just blaming the speculators, is very simplistic. There is evidence, for example, that a colleague of mine at SIU in my department that did work when it comes to corn, right? People were saying that corn prices are all being moved by speculators. Well, in his study, he didn't find that that was the case. So it's a little bit more complicated than just the evil speculators.
Obviously, I agree with everything she said, but I probably don't think the cartel OPEC is really all that relevant anymore. But still, I get the basic thesis of it. What I would say is, what's the alternative to having an open, a marketplace determine commodity prices? I don't think as she pointed out, we used to have the Texas Railroad Commission. That I don't think we want to go back to that type of pricing system.
Okay, thank you. The next question was submitted on Facebook by someone from Murfreesboro, and the question would be for Phil. It says, how clean are you claiming coal is?
Where do I start? Or where do I end? I don't know. Obviously, there are differences of opinion out there. As I think I mentioned previously, the United States has the most restrictive air emissions policies and laws in the world. The United States coal-burning power plants since 1980, emissions have been reduced by 50%, while the amount of electricity generated from coal has doubled. But I know that's not enough. If there's any pollution that goes into the air, it's probably too much for some people. What's a manageable number? I think the laws that have been put into place by the federal government have tried to use scientific measuring in terms of what levels of sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxide, and mercury are too dangerous levels for health of the citizens of the United States, and that's what levels that the laws are set at. Again, I guess I need to amend my statement because Dr. Wiltowski mentioned there's nothing that's zero emissions, because FutureGen was near zero emissions. Bill didn't. You were kind of polite and didn't jump up and correct me on that. But again, to be able to use a resource that we have a lot of, there is a process out there that can be furthered and advanced in order to use that. Is that going to be clean enough for everyone? I'm not sure, but there's a risk in anything that's produced. There are byproducts that could be harmful, and it just is what level is acceptable, and I guess that's what's set by the government.
Okay, thank you. The next is another Facebook question, and it looks like a question that Brad Richards, who's Executive Vice President of the Illinois Oil and Gas Association, should probably answer. And it is, what is your perspective on fracking, and what is happening with fracking in Southern Illinois?
Well, a couple of things. I always feel, I sometimes fail to mention this. There isn't, hydraulic fracturing is not new. We first started hydraulically fracturing wells in Illinois in the 50s. It has gotten much larger, so I don't mean to imply that it's not different, but the technology itself, conceptually, is nothing new. You inject sand, water, and chemicals, and it's the chemicals that get folks that raise the concerns, but sand, water, and chemical under pressure until you reach a point where you crack the reservoir. you increase the near wellbore permeability and produce more oil and gas. And in some cases in Illinois, I will tell you, in fact, in many cases, without hydraulic fracturing, wells would not be commercial. I mean, without hydraulic fracturing, there would be no oil and gas industry. As far as new exploration and development, it would shut down the industry. Now, having said that, I mean, the high volume hydraulic fracturing, which is sometimes referred to as slick water fracking, they've increased the size and the horsepower of it, and I don't want anybody to take away from this that it isn't different, but it is still conceptually the same process, just much larger. And from our perspective, quite frankly, it's largely been a manufactured issue. There are folks who oppose oil and gas development, recognize that relatively cheap fossil fuels are kind of problematic for the energy future that some folks long for. We recognize the political realities, and we're addressing it. Do I think that hydraulic fracturing is going to be the ruination of the world or Southern Illinois? Absolutely not. But we're trying to address the political realities of it. I would also say, as to the question about coal, I used to work in the coal industry too, so the poverty is the worst polluter, and we should remember what affordable energy, which coal has largely brought us in this country, what it's done for our infrastructure, for our quality of life. There's still a lot of people in this world that burn dung. I don't think we want to go back there. So, but to the fracking in Illinois, it is going on. There's probably a well was probably hydraulically fractured today. I hope so. It means my folks in my industry are out working. But it would have been a small-scale hydraulic fracture treatment that we've been doing for 50, 60 years. The future in Illinois, we hope that we have some high-volume hydraulic fracturing. We're working on regulations to try to appease the concerns that folks have about the process, and we'll hopefully have something in place as early as November. And we absolutely look forward to going forward with the combination of horizontal drilling and high-volume hydraulic fracturing and create a robust oil and gas industry in Southern Illinois.
Okay, thank you. The next question is the first question submitted by someone in the audience, and what we've taken with your questions is we put them in the order that we received them, so that's when we'll give them to the panel. And this actually, I think anybody who wants to jump on this first, feel free to do so. The question is, should we not be concerned about global climate change in our energy future? Why did none of the speakers mention this in their opening remarks?
I think we should be concerned. I think we absolutely should be concerned. I think the scientific evidence is that climate change is occurring. And this drought this summer has probably convinced some people that it is happening, because we're going to see more extreme events. We're going to see maybe milder winters and more droughts in the summer. So when I talk about environmental impact, the environmental impact is not just on groundwater. The environmental impact is also carbon emissions. And actually, I think we've talked about it a lot, because the rationale for a future gen, the rationale for underground carbon sequestration is climate mitigation, climate change mitigation. I think what we should really be concerned about, though, is the fact that we as a country have been unable to do anything about it. The only initiatives in the United States are at the state level. And that's because, in my opinion, the public is not educated enough to appreciate that this is a real issue, and that this should be part of the cost of energy. Yes, full cost of energy means that you put the cost of CO2 on top of what you pay.
Brad just made a very important statement just a few minutes ago, and that was poverty. And all of these things don't come without a cost. And if we are going to control for CO2, that has a cost. And it will increase the cost of energy. Who's going to pay for that? It's the consumers that are going to pay for that. Point number one. Point number two, the term at least was used as global climate change. not many countries, not many of the developed countries in the world seem to want to tackle this issue alone, since the major polluters are under no obligation to participate in reducing their contribution of CO2 emissions. It is a global issue. And until the nations of like China and India, who see our standard of living and want and deserve our standard of living, I think it's senseless to talk about reducing CO2 emissions without a full discussion of the total cost involved. And the other thing that's not being discussed here is the millions of people, maybe a billion people around the world that don't have electricity, as Brad alluded to earlier. What are they going to do if the price of energy goes out of sight, that they can't even attain even the simplest forms of energy to enjoy a standard of living that we've been fortunate enough to enjoy for many years? So I think the debate should go on. I don't think it's a settled science. The consensus of science means nothing. Einstein once said that my theory of relativity is all well and good, but if someone proves me wrong, I'm wrong. And there is no complete science on this. I'm not convinced it is. And I know that people are going to say, well, sure, you represent the coal industry. But I think before we start spending billions and billions of dollars to control something that may not have a significant impact, we need to think about that. We need to come up with a cost-benefit analysis that makes sense.
Okay, anybody else? Go ahead.
Well, I would just say, yes, I think we're all concerned about global warming, and I think, state and national policies are beginning to reflect that we didn't have a full discussion about whether we believe in it and to its impact doesn't mean that we've disregarded it. I think if you look at the state's renewable portfolio standard that utilities and suppliers like my members have to meet reflects, at least at this point, the legislature's belief we need to contribute something to reducing the emissions that contribute to global warming. That's why I think natural gas beyond price at this point is a bit favorable with a lot of customers. And God forbid I say this, but even, the nuclear industry, again, I'm not here to promote it, but again, both of those fuel sources are pretty good on the emissions side. So I would say overall that we didn't have a robust discussion doesn't mean that we're indifferent. We're already doing it in our own way, whether it's clean coal technologies to make coal more acceptable environmentally, whether it's renewable portfolio standards or the use of fuels that are lower emission, is our way of contributing to the whole global climate issue. I agree with my friend Phil, though, it is a global issue, not one that can be settled here in this country.
So I would like to add a few more words about this festival. Is global warming or climate change? When you will go into the history of business, first it was global warming, then it came the climate change. And all of us, we know that climate is changing. Now, are you sure that you are such a powerful that we can change the climate of an entire world? I don't think so. There is several different, and for sure it's a human activity, for sure it's energy transformation, whatever we are doing, but there is also a lot of evidence that there is something going on sun. I just got a few days ago the new pictures from a few of my colleagues who are working in the observatory in Hawaii, actually showing whatever the new sun activities. They still don't know what is going on. There is some evidence that the ice cap of Venus they are actually melting because of the temperature increase over there. You think that because of us? I don't think so. It's too far distance. So we have to take into account all those possibilities, what is happening. And I agree. No one would like to live in the bad environment. Well, no one would like to produce something dirty. But what we are not discussing about how clean the oceans are. What we are not discussing how clean the rivers are. Mainly we are jumping on carbon dioxide. And this is what I'm a little bit opposing. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but we have to take into account all of our activities, which may be not terrible changing climate, but changing our living conditions. Plus, again, I will repeat those two words, efficiency and conservation. That's those key words, actually, which you can have the smaller impact, if any, on the climate.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, the next question, it looks like Dr. Wiltowski would be up your alley, but if anybody wants to follow up, they're welcome to. The question is, have none of the speakers heard of methods of storing energy generated by solar and wind power? For example, hydrogen fuel cells, pumping water with energy surplus so that it can support base load. And then in parentheses, see Jacobson and DeLucci research.
Yes, of course, one of the main problems with the energy business is energy storage. And I will tell you that our battery in the car has only 30% efficiency. So whatever the part of the gasoline we are using, which is driving our generator, and then we are charging the battery, 70% is going into the air. So, but when you were discussing the solar or wind, what will happen in the evening? Now solar battery doesn't work. So the best idea is to store. And actually, what I do believe in the future of energy, part of this is hydrogen. We are kind of cycling. The cycle may be several million years, but it always reminds me the pretty nice book written by Henry Deniken. The title at the beginning was Hydrogen. So, and there is a research right now going on. Think about this. The wind is blowing. We have the windmill. We are producing electricity. This electricity we can use to make the water electrolysis, producing oxygen, pretty nice stuff to release into the atmosphere, and producing hydrogen and store it. The same is solar. During the nice sunny day, we can produce electricity, again producing hydrogen the same way, and store it, and use it later on. Fuel cells. We can run actually our car without the major remodeling of the engine. Instead of using gasoline, we can use hydrogen. It will be a nice effect because only water will come out of the water vapor will come out of our exhaust system. So there's a lot of research going on worldwide in this area. Of course, fuel cells, that's another future. And there's a lot of research everywhere, actually, with more efficient fuel cells. Yes, energy storage, that's the main problem. Batteries, pretty low efficiency. Everyone is working right now. The problem is actually raw materials, what you can use to produce those good batteries. But that's an important problem, but I'm very optimistic about this. We are moving forward.
But can I add to what Dr. Wiltowski said, that when you think about the energy sector, you shouldn't think about a gazelle. You should think about an elephant. We have a lot of existing infrastructure that's set up to use the sources we have. You're not going to go out tomorrow, all of you, and buy new cars just because a fuel cell comes out. If you're married to a guy like my husband, he says 150 miles, not before. There is a long turnover for our car fleet. We have all these nuclear power plants. We have all these coal plants. They cost a lot of money to replace. This is not a switch on, switch off problem. You cannot kid yourself that tomorrow, costlessly, we're going to be able to switch our energy sources. There is a lot of legacy effects in this system, and we can only transition away from some things slowly, paying the price, and by having a steady policy to do so. None of this is going to happen overnight.
Okay, thank you. The next question looks like, Brad, it'd be a good question for you. It says, since natural gas fracking needs large quantities of clean water, 1 to 5 million gallons per well, what do you see as the most promising sources in southern Illinois for this much water?
Well, I have to tell you, when you start talking about the quantities of water, I mean, a million gallons of water, I mean, it's a big number, and it's a lot of water. What I don't think people understand, perhaps, just how much water, flows down a sizable river, in a few seconds of watching the water flow by. This is still, it's a real issue. But I mean, there's plenty of water in southern Illinois. I mean, they're doing these type of large-scale resource developments in much more arid regions, for sure. I mean, South Texas, for one. I don't think it's going to be a huge constraint, but I will tell you, in response to some of those the concerns expressed, you're seeing, for example, there's technology being worked on to produce brine, the salt water that is associated with oil production throughout the world. We have lots and lots of brine. That we'll never run out of that. And there are recycling, reuse of the frac fluids. And it's just an offshoot of the taking into account the environmental concerns, the concerns of conservation type concerns, and those things are being addressed. There's also work being done on waterless hydraulic fracture treatments, where they use compressed gas or various other things. But hopefully that answers the question.
Well, if I could just follow that up, are you looking at more groundwater or surface water?
Oh, the water itself, I'm assuming, I mean, there's readily available groundwater, but I think most of this would be a surface water. Just pull them from nearest available surface water.
Okay, the next question looks like would be for Kevin. It says, are you involved in energy aggregation contracts with municipalities? Municipalities have negotiated 50% or higher green energy contracts. What level of solar and wind are involved in such contracts?
The answer is yes. The municipal aggregation law, which allows communities by local decision to aggregate their load and put it up for solicitation, are exactly the people I represent. The competitive energy suppliers, or electric suppliers in this case. And of about 240 aggregation plans this year, 236 have been won by my members. So we're heavily involved. It is up to the municipality in their competitive bid, the composition of the type of energy they wish. I am aware that Oak Park, Illinois, is 100% green. And they're paying a premium for it, but the overall price is still less than what Commonwealth Edison was charging them. I don't have statistics on the rest of those. They're published. I just don't have them off the top of my head, other than to tell you it is up to the local community and its elected officials and decision makers to make those determinations of the composition of electricity they're getting in from what source. And my suppliers will provide that at below the utility price.
Okay, thank you. The next question, maybe for Brad, but I think the whole panel could have an opinion on this. Do you see a future for natural gas to be more than a niche player in the transportation sector?
I'll leave some room for the rest of these guys to get tired of listening to me. I mean, clearly it could be a significant part of the transportation mix. But again, Sylvia said, I mean, there's infrastructure issues there. It's not going to happen overnight. But you could start with some of the fleet type vehicles. And like, for example, I live in Fairfield, and the nearest town of any size, I guess, is Evansville, and they've had there's compressed natural gas fueling stations there for, and I'm trying to remember like some of their metro transportation. That's been going on for a very long time. So, I mean, yes, it absolutely could be done, but, it would be quite a challenge to make that the transportation fuel that was, powering all these vehicles going down the road.
Anybody else want to? Okay. The next question, probably Dr. Wiltowski, we could start with you. What is the future of LENR, L-E-N-R, and it says low energy nuclear reaction, and then underneath that says new term for cold fusion?
When you follow the history of science, it was 10 years ago when somewhere in Wyoming, I believe, or Utah, someone published that this cold fusion makes sense. NSF immediately gave $5 million. Then it was a worldwide discussion actually what is going on. Probably they make the wrong calculation. What I know, and I discussed with the author of this question a couple of days ago, a lot of research is going on right now, but because it's such bright idea, people are scared of publishing this. But I do believe that's one of the way when you are going, this is so-called cold fusion. There's a lot of research going on with the regular fusion, if I can use this term, with this high temperature fusion. I believe that maybe in 30, according to the European Union, they are assuming that in 2060 they will have the first system working. When this will happen, actually this will change our approach to the energy. It will be a lot of energy. I'm very optimistic about this. And it's not supposed to be such expensive, assuming that we'll pay lower taxes. But I do believe that's the future, and I know from few people that are working in it, the problem is rather psychological. We are always kind of the opposite to believing that something may happen like this. Plus the story with the first approach with, say, cold fusion, and which was probably some false reporting results or whatever. But when we are working with something new, people are always scared how it smells and what we can approach. But I'm optimistic about this, and I believe that will be one of the way of generating energy.
Thank you. The next question looks like Phil would be best, and Phil, to remind everyone, is the president of the Illinois Coal Association. The question is, what are your views on mountaintop removal? Does the need for coal outweigh the destruction of our wildlife, forests, water supplies, and natural beauty, especially when we have other energy options?
Well, it's an interesting question. I guess in the coal industry, we don't speak ill of our other coal operators. Obviously, we don't have mountaintop mining in Illinois. You have to have mountains for that. We're rather flat. I guess in thinking the way to answer this is to go back and mention something I mentioned earlier. When our industry fell on hard times in the 1990s with the Clean Air Act, the amendments of 1990 that reduced the amount of sulfur dioxide that could come out of power plants. And what happened then was that no one really came to the rescue of the Illinois Coal Association or operators in the Illinois Basin, which makes up parts of western Indiana and western Kentucky. So if there is a concern for that environmentally, first I guess I should state that I think the environmental hurdles can be overcome. I think if you look at the complete picture in terms of mine reclamation and what some of the sites look like after the coal has been mined, there's been a great improvement over what existed before then. However, if the coal needs to be replaced, it's likely going to be coal from the Illinois Basin. And there's probably about 60 to 90 million tons a year of coal that's mined using the mountaintop mining method. If that's not done in Appalachia, perhaps it'll be done in Illinois. That coal could be replaced by our producers here, increasing our production, creating good jobs for our citizens, and helping the economy of the state of Illinois. But again, going back, I guess trying to split that question in two ways. I believe that the coal can be mined in an environmentally sensitive way, and that the reclamation process, I think, is proven, not only in Appalachia but here, that the land is in a better use, in a more productive use in most cases than it was before. But to put it in a more of a local term, Illinois, I think, is already seeing some of the effects of the pressure on mountaintop mining, with a couple of new coal mines opening up that might fill in the void that might occur if that form of mining is prohibited.
Thank you. Brad, looks like you're up again with the next question. Please explain why France and Bulgaria have entirely banned hydraulic fracking. Have whole countries been duped by funny science?
I hope we don't emulate France. What were the two countries? I know that there have been...
France and Bulgaria is what the question said.
I mean, honestly, those aren't two countries that I would hope that we tailor our energy policies after. Really not
they
sure.
said, have they been duped?
To some extent, absolutely. No question in my mind. There is a hysteria about hydraulic fracturing. The facts just simply don't match the hysteria, and so have they been duped? I don't know if that's the word that I would choose, but it probably fits.
Okay, thank you. Sylvia, maybe you could start on this one, but others could jump in. What role does or should policy play in shaping our energy future?
So, I think this is a great question, because we've been talking about market-based pricing, but really these markets are driven by a gazillion things, including policy. These are not policy-free markets. This country has spent a lot of money doing R&D so that we can, let's just think about what the president did. The president saved Detroit. The president saved the car industry in the United States. That has a lot of implication for the energy sector in this country, right? A policy is and has always been, think about when we built the railroads. They were not like sprouting out. They were driven by federal policy. Our energy and transportation policy may not be cohesive, may be piecemeal, may be not well laid out, may be in the hands of partisan fights, but it's definitely shaped what's happened in this country. Think about the FutureGen case. Why do you think George Bush decided that even though there was agreement that Illinois was better than Texas, why did he block FutureGen? He blocked FutureGen because Texas didn't get FutureGen. I mean, it's obvious that policy is fundamental in a lot of things energy related. There is no free market without policy when it comes to energy issues, and not just on the environmental side, but on the infrastructure side.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we've come to... Oh, I'm sorry. Did anybody else want to jump on that or answer? Okay, thank you. We've come to the last question that's been asked by the audience, so we'll get this question and then we'll give you each 2 minutes for closing remarks. This question is, and it looks like, Phil, this would be your question. Possibly Brad could jump in as well. How will fossil fuel industries protect their customers against the health risks that are associated with using these technologies? Zero emissions plants are a good idea for reducing cardiovascular diseases, asthma, etc. But those toxins that are not released are then stored somewhere. Coal slurry is not well regulated and is known to contaminate groundwater and cause things like neurological diseases. How can you regulate this in a safe way while educating consumers about real risks?
I guess I don't know where to start, because I think the answer was the question, so I'm going to leave it at that. I mean, I think that the person who asked the question, his mind is made up. I'm not a scientist. I mean, I represent an industry. We believe that we hope, and we as an industry, we work hard to make sure that the standards that are set, that are both protective of the environment and of human health, and continues to allow the use of our product. I mean, to say that coal ash waste is not regulated is untrue. There is a state regulation, there is federal regulation, but I guess I'm not sure where else to go with an answer to that question. So I'll leave it at that.
Can I say something? Sure. The United States and the federal government, the Environmental Protection Agency, heavily regulate the coal industry. To say that that is not the case is just not true. You could say they don't regulate it enough, but this is not the Wild West. This is the most heavily regulated industry probably in this country.
Okay, in defense of the person who asked the question, it did say coal slurry is not well regulated. It didn't say not regulated at all.
I can tell you from the oil and gas industry perspective, we feel like we're pretty heavily regulated too.
Okay. Sir, I don't know if you were here at the beginning, but we took questions. They had them written down, and
maybe said after that you would ask questions to the audience after you read the question.
No, I didn't say that. I said if you had a question, if you would bring it up here, we could get it asked. The problem is we're now at the end of the discussion. I tried to remind everybody that to bring their questions up here. Okay, we are going to have, after we're done here, you can ask questions, and there will be a time at the Global Gourmet where the speakers are going to be. I'm sorry, we're running out of time. We're getting close to 8 o'clock. We do have 2 minutes for the remarks. And one thing, as you close your remarks, I want you to think about this question. And that imagine it's the year 2112 and we're having an energy debate in Carbondale. Who on the expert panel that is here today do you believe will not be represented in 2112 and why? And if you could just weave that into your closing remarks. And you have 2 minutes, please. Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
I'll start because I'll answer that first. I won't be here. Well, not because I'd be too old, and I don't think I'll survive. No, I in fact, this was an interesting question, and we kind of saw this earlier, and I posed this to the Illinois Clean Coal Institute Advisory Board last year. I said I firmly believe there's something going to be invented sometime in the next pick a time frame, 50. 60, 70 years where fossil fuels will not be needed for energy. And we have these huge deposits of coal. What are we going to do with that, if anything? Is there another use for coal other than producing energy, or is the industry going to go away? So I firmly believe, given the technological advances in my lifetime that we've seen, I grew up when, I'm not even going to start to go down the whole list. I think that you know them, and just in the last 10 years. We will not be using fossil fuels for energy, I'll predict, in 50 years. And I won't be around here that you can say, well, you were wrong, but I'm going to make that prediction. And that's a challenge that I've given my industry. Is this where are we going to go? Is this product going to be used? And then how do you transition to something else? Because as we've seen manufacturing jobs gone away, how do you retrain workers to other areas where the jobs are? Where are the jobs going to be then? And what impact is that going to have on the economy? But until we reach there, I guess as part of my closing remarks, I would just conclude by saying we do have an abundance of coal here in Illinois. We are, and thank you, Sylvia, we are one of the more heaviest regulated industries in the United States, and there is technology there to use our products. So until the time comes when something replaces coal, I think we ought to work hard to find ways that we can use coal, because for many years, for over 100 years, it's been the source of low-cost energy, which has been the driving force of the economic engine for the economy of the United States.
Well, I would say I agree in part with Phil that, one, it's hard to predict the future. Two, I think technology will play a major role, just like it did in the telecommunications industry. Now we're looking at, very much pocket-sized communicators versus what we used to wear around after the phone. I would think all of us will be here in one way, shape, or form. And I'm going to say that because, one, the politics will likely demand it. The policies, good, bad, or indifferent, will likely promote some type of use of each of these fossil fuels. And there will be some type of balancing with environmental regulations. And frankly, world events. I mean, we can't predict. This is a hostile world. There's uncertainty often drives decision making. So I guess 100 years from now, I would like to think Phil's industry is still alive, so is Brad's, so's the professors, and hopefully in 100 years we'll get to some balanced, comprehensive energy plan. That might be a pipe dream, but I hope that happens.
I would like to make very briefly, I do believe that I will be here in 2112. I'm trying to be always very optimistic, but I do believe in technology and technology progress. One of my job is actually to do the research, so we follow and check what is going on worldwide, and I'm very often surprised what people are trying to do and how we can achieve it. On the other hand, it was already discussion here about the questions regarding environment. One of the Murphy's law says that something wrong happened, it will always happen. And also this kind of the accidents. We are saying that nuclear technology is pretty safe. It is safe. But when the accidents happen, Chernobyl or Fukushima, it's happened, and we are learning the lesson. We are always learning the lesson something. And this is a good point, because we are not making the same error again. And this is why we have to be smart. And I do believe that you never know, maybe in 2112 I will come not by the car, maybe some other way of transportation here. Maybe I'll go to the gas station and buy hydrogen for 20 cents for 10,000 gallons. Who knows? But we have to be optimistic. Speaking about the question at the beginning, what you were asking about this energy debate, we have to discuss about this. Because discussion actually is pushing us to move forward. And especially when someone who is representing us knows that we know what you are talking about, the word of mouth goes and goes and goes. And this is what supposed to end up with the energy policy. This is what I started this evening. We don't have energy policy. And there is no country around the world which has. Maybe it's the time to change it.
So I'm pretty sure that I know who's gonna be here in 2012, which is environmentalists protesting the impact of whatever technology is gonna be used. Because there is no free lunch. We want things out of the environment. It causes costs. The only way to completely eliminate those things is to self-destruct. The issue here is, what do we do to minimize it? What do we do to minimize it to a way that's acceptable to society at large? But no matter what the things we want to be alive, we are pollution producers as humans. We just have to find a way to minimize that impact, but it will never go away.
Well, that was probably better than I could say it, so thank you. But I guess what I would, just to kind of sum things up, to go full circle with what I started my opening remarks, I've seen a transformation in the oil and gas industry over the last 10 years. I mean, it is an absolute transformation. I suppose the point here would be to kind of conclude, at least in the context of what to expect 100 years from now. I have no idea. I don't have a clue. I could have never dreamed that I'd be sitting here tonight talking about a transformation of the oil and gas industry even a decade ago. Never dreamed it. So to that extent, who knows? I don't have a clue. But I do appreciate the opportunity to come and speak.
Thank you very much. I'd also like to thank the audience for coming here tonight on a Saturday evening. Luckily, we had beautiful weather, so it's pretty pleasant here. We do have an exit survey for those. This is the first time we've done this, so we're looking for ways to do it better next time. Also need to thank a few people, Jeff Shepard and Greg Wendt, who put together the audio and video. And this will be available on the internet, I think on SIU's website at Advanced Energy Institute's website with SIU, so that'll be great, so you can view it later. I'd like to thank SIU and the Advanced Energy Institute for helping put this together, and the Coal Research Center. Also like to thank Carbondale Main Street. They're the ones that helped promote this, and they loaned us the chairs and the tables and the audio equipment. Carbondale and Marion Chamber of Commerce, who's supporting promoting the event, and the Global Gourmet, who made their restaurant available for us before and after. And then finally, of course, I'd like to thank these great speakers. They did a magnificent job bringing and representing a lot of issues in energy. They didn't have to be here. It's a Saturday evening. They could have been home watching college football or doing something else, but they came out here. Okay, or something else. The Olympics are over. But I really want to thank you so much for being here, and it was awesome that you could be here and discuss these issues. Thank you.
Well, thank you for originating the idea.